In New York City, they whispered her name like a curse. Vanessa Sterling, the Ice Queen. She was engaged to the most feared man in the 5 boroughs, which made her a ghost you could not touch. She possessed a diamond that could blind you, a fortune that could buy the city, and she commanded the terrified respect of every soul who crossed her path. This woman was protected by a wall of power, but power can make you careless. She made a single, catastrophic error in judgment. She dismissed the one person who watched her every move, the waitress serving her meal. Keep listening, because on this one night, a vast criminal enterprise will begin to shatter. An opulent wedding will be called off forever. And the most dreaded woman in all of New York is about to have her entire world stripped away. The weapon that brings her down is nothing more than an ordinary silver fork. This is the incredible story of how a simple server dismantled a mafia dynasty. This story carries a powerful message. The people who are ignored, the ones who pour your wine and clear your plates, they see everything you try to hide. And when the world underestimates a woman with nothing left to lose, that is when she becomes the most dangerous person in the room. Listen closely to every detail, because by the end, you will never look at the quiet ones the same way again. A cold rain fell on Tribeca, but it could not clean the city's filth. Instead, the downpour only made the neon signs glare more intensely on the slick, dark streets. Step inside Loro, the most sought-after Italian reservation in Manhattan, and the world changed. The atmosphere was thick with the expensive aroma of truffle oil, but beneath it was an unmistakable current of anxiety. Sarah's fingers were clamped so tightly around her silver serving tray that her knuckles had lost all color. She caught a glimpse of herself in the dark glass of the kitchen door. Her server's uniform was perfectly pressed, and her apron was immaculate, but her eyes held a deep, weary exhaustion. At just 24 years old, she was pulling one double shift after another, trying to erase the mountain of gambling debt her father had left behind. This particular evening was the one she had been fearing for 7 straight days. "They have arrived." "Table 4, the manager, Mr. Ritchie," whispered with a hiss. He nervously dabbed at the sweat beading on his shiny bald head. "Listen to me. You do not take a breath without their permission. You will not look Mr. Moretti in the eye. And Sarah, I am begging you, for all that is holy, do not do anything to provoke her." He never needed to speak her name. Everyone knew he meant Vanessa Sterling. The instant the massive oak doors swung inward, the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. A palpable change occurred, as if all the air had been vacuumed out of the space. First, 2 bodyguards stepped inside. They were colossal men, wearing tailored suits that were easily worth more than everything Sarah had ever earned in her entire life. After them, Dante Moretti made his entrance. And Dante was nothing like the crude caricature painted by the gossip columns. This man was not a common criminal. He carried himself like a king. He was dressed in a charcoal Brioni suit, a masterpiece of tailoring that fit him flawlessly. His dark hair was combed back from his forehead, and his expression was a carefully constructed mask of disinterest and deadly intellect. This was the man who held the city's shipping docks, its powerful unions, and nearly half of all its real estate in the palm of his hand. Despite this immense power, he moved with a silent, fluid grace. But as captivating as he was, every single person in the room was staring at the woman on his arm. Vanessa Sterling's beauty was undeniable, but it was a cold and artificial kind of attractiveness. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a severe, tight style, enormous diamonds hung from her earlobes, and a cruel sneer looked as though it had been carved permanently onto her bright red lips. She moved with an exaggerated limp, putting almost all her weight on a bespoke cane, topped with a large pearl. "My leg is acting up, Dante," she complained, her voice piercing the quiet ambiance and causing the jazz pianist to falter mid-song. "This floor is a death trap. It is so slippery. Did anyone bother to clean it? Or is this an assassination attempt before our wedding?" Dante's face remained a blank canvas, but his hand tightened on her arm, offering more support. "It is marble, Vanessa. Of course it is polished. Just focus on walking. I cannot believe you are forcing me to dine in this place, she retorted, flinging her expensive coat in the direction of a young busboy without even a glance. The entire room stinks of garlic and desperation. Sarah drew in a slow, steadying breath. As the head waitress for the exclusive VIP area, she was no stranger to difficult customers. She had managed obnoxious Wall Street traders and senators who had had far too much to drink. Surely she could survive the fiancée of a mob boss. With practiced, graceful movements, she approached their table and set down the leather-bound menus. A good evening to you, Mr. Moretti. Miss Sterling, it is a pleasure to have you back at Loro. May I begin by getting you some water? Vanessa sliced through her greeting without even raising her head from her glowing phone. Bring me sparkling water. It must be at room temperature. And I swear, if a single one of those bubbles appears hostile, you will take it back. Also, this napkin is unacceptable. Replace it. It feels like a piece of sandpaper. For a brief moment, Sarah hesitated. The napkin was made from the finest 100% Egyptian cotton. Right away, ma'am, she replied smoothly. Just then, Dante raised his head. His eyes, so dark they were nearly black, met Sarah's for a fleeting second. She saw no cruelty in his gaze, only a profound and weary curiosity. He had the look of a man imprisoned in a gilded cage he had constructed himself. Your name is Sarah, correct? Dante's voice was a low, gravelly sound. A jolt went through Sarah. He remembered her name. Yes, it is, sir. Do not worry about the napkin. It is perfectly fine, Dante said with a dismissive wave of his hand. Just bring us the wine list. We will have the Bulgari from 1996. The sharp crack of Vanessa's phone hitting the tabletop silenced the entire room. Pardon me, she seethed. Are you actually contradicting me in front of the staff? In front of this worthless girl? I am just trying to have a peaceful dinner, Vanessa, Dante replied, his jaw muscles clenching tightly. I am going to be Mrs. Moretti, she hissed, her face close to his. If I declare that the napkin is made of sandpaper, then it is made of sandpaper. And you, she snarled, turning her hateful gaze directly on Sarah. Stop looking at my fiancé. I see exactly what you are doing. You think a pretty smile and fluttering eyelashes will earn you a bigger tip? You are nothing. You are filth. Now go get my water. Sarah immediately dropped her gaze to the floor. She turned and walked quickly back to the kitchen, feeling her heart pound violently inside her chest. She is so much worse this evening. Rocco, the sous chef, kept his voice low as he carefully arranged a delicate appetizer on a plate. The rumor mill says the wedding is happening next month, he whispered. She is on edge because Dante still has not put his signature on the prenuptial agreement. She is desperate to secure her position. She is an absolute monster, Sarah breathed, her hand shaking slightly as she took a new bottle of San Pellegrino from the shelf. Be very careful, Sarah, Rocco cautioned, gesturing toward her with a soup ladle. Dante Moretti is not a man to cross, but at least he operates by a set of rules. That woman, Vanessa, she has no rules. She would destroy your life for her own amusement. I was told she had the valet from last week fired simply because he touched his own rearview mirror when she was in the passenger seat. Sarah gave a slight nod, her hands instinctively smoothing the front of her clean apron. She could not afford to lose this job. The money was too important. Her strategy was simple: become invisible. She would fade into the background like a ghost. But she knew that ghosts are often the ones who witness the secrets that people try so desperately to conceal. When Sarah came back to their table, the atmosphere was so heavy with tension you could feel it on your skin. Vanessa was putting on a grand performance of her physical ailment. Oh, my hand is cramping up again, Vanessa lamented loudly, lifting her left hand for all to see, the one adorned with a massive 10-carat diamond ring. She rubbed her wrist with an exaggerated motion. It must be the nerve damage from the accident. It is flaring up terribly. Dante, darling, you are going to have to cut my steak for me this evening. I can hardly grasp a fork. Dante took a slow sip of his wine and let out a quiet sigh. That is interesting. Because you seemed perfectly fine at the art gallery opening earlier today, Vanessa. That was adrenaline, she snapped back instantly. I was suffering the entire time, but you never pay attention to me. My doctor told me the nerves in this hand are completely destroyed. I have zero ability to grip anything, so if I happen to drop something, it is certainly not my fault. Sarah moved with silent efficiency, pouring the water. Her eyes were fixed on Vanessa's left hand. The nails were perfectly shaped and painted, and the fingers lay motionless and limp against the white linen of the tablecloth. I will need a straw, Vanessa commanded, her eyes on Sarah. I cannot possibly lift this glass. My wrist will not allow it. I will bring one for you right away, Sarah replied in a quiet, professional tone. But as Sarah began to turn away from the table, she saw it. Out of the corner of her eye, she witnessed Vanessa reach for her small clutch purse with her supposedly injured left hand. It was not a weak or fumbling gesture. It was a sudden, sharp movement, pulling the bag much closer to her plate, almost as if she were trying to conceal something inside. The action was swift and exact, completely at odds with the story of shredded nerves and no grip strength. Sarah stopped for only a heartbeat, a small frown creasing her brow, then continued on her way to the bar. A question echoed in her mind. Why would someone fake an injury to their hand? Sarah understood that wealthy people often craved attention, but this felt different. It felt like a deliberate and calculated lie. By the time Sarah got back with a straw for Vanessa's water, the first course had been served. It was a beautiful carpaccio topped with delicate truffle shavings. This smells absolutely rotten, Vanessa declared, her nose wrinkled in disgust. Using her right hand, she lifted her fork and prodded at the thin slices of meat. Dante, make them get this out of my sight. I have decided I want the lobster risotto. And while you are at it, tell the chef he may have to chew it for me first, since you seem to think I am a complete invalid. Dante slowly rubbed his temples with his fingertips. Vanessa, for my sake, please just try to eat. I simply cannot, she proclaimed, letting the fork fall from her hand with a dramatic clang against the china. My left hand is completely non-functional, and frankly, my right hand is exhausted from holding this entire relationship together by itself. The entire display was a calculated act. It was a loud, vulgar show designed to publicly shame Dante until he gave in to her demands. Standing discreetly near a structural pillar, Sarah watched every detail unfold. She had been raised in a tough part of Queens and had learned from a young age how to interpret body language. She could easily tell the difference between genuine suffering and a performance. Vanessa was not in any pain. She was just creating chaos out of sheer boredom. And then it happened. The first visible crack in her carefully constructed lie. A new busboy, a young man named Leo, who was only on his first week, was quietly clearing the adjacent table. His movements were clumsy with nerves. As he pivoted, his elbow made contact with the corner of Dante's table, knocking a heavy, solid silver salt shaker off balance. The shaker wobbled for a moment on the very edge of the white linen. Then, gravity claimed it. The heavy silver object tipped over and began its descent straight toward Vanessa's expensive lap. The entire event took less than the blink of an eye. Vanessa's supposedly useless left hand launched out from beneath the napkin on her lap. Her movement was as fast and deadly as a striking cobra. She intercepted the heavy shaker while it was still in the air, mere inches from staining her designer silk dress. Her grasp on it was like a vice. There was absolutely no sign of a tremor, no hint of weakness. She had plucked it from the air with the sharp precision of a highly trained athlete. For one frozen moment in time, Vanessa was caught. She was holding the shaker firmly in her supposedly paralyzed left hand. Her fingers were curled tightly around the polished metal. Her head snapped up, and her gaze locked directly with Sarah's. In that instant, Sarah knew she was the only witness. Dante was engrossed in his phone again. The poor busboy was staring at the floor, already apologizing profusely. Vanessa's eyes first widened with sheer panic, but that look was immediately replaced by one of pure, unadulterated venom. The realization hit her The waitress had seen everything. With a slow, measured movement, Vanessa carefully set the salt shaker back on the table. Then she allowed her hand to go completely limp once more, letting it fall into her lap with the lifelessness of a dead fish. "You incompetent fool!" Vanessa suddenly shrieked, redirecting all her fury onto the terrified busboy in a desperate attempt to create a distraction. "Do you have any idea what you have done? You nearly destroyed a $10,000 dress. Dante, I want him fired. Get rid of him this instant." "The shaker did not touch you, Vanessa," Dante said calmly, his eyes still fixed on his screen. "He put my safety at risk," she lied, her voice climbing higher with manufactured hysteria. "I am shaking all over. Just look at me. I am trembling." She held her right hand up in the air, forcing it to shake for dramatic effect. Meanwhile, her left hand, the one that had just executed a flawless catch, remained carefully concealed beneath the table. Sarah made a choice. She took a step forward. She knew she could not stand by and let Leo lose his job. The young man had 2 children to support. "Ma'am," Sarah said, her voice steady. "Leo is extremely sorry. It was a complete accident. I was watching the entire time, and I can assure you that nothing made contact with you." Vanessa's head whipped around, her eyes locking onto Sarah with a predatory intensity. "You saw the whole thing," she hissed, the threat in her voice as sharp and cold as a shard of glass. The unspoken message was crystal clear. "Keep your mouth shut about what you just witnessed, or I will utterly destroy you." Sarah met her stare without flinching, her own gaze steady. "Yes, ma'am," she replied, her voice even. "I saw exactly what happened." A slow, chilling smile spread across Vanessa's face, a smile that never reached her eyes. "Is that so?" she murmured. "Well, since you're so wonderfully observant, why don't you retrieve my main course and bring me a fresh fork? This one appears to be dirty." She lifted the heavy, gleaming silver steak fork, holding it out for a moment before deliberately letting it slip from her grasp. It clattered loudly on the polished floor. "Oops," Vanessa said, her voice dripping with a sickeningly sweet, false innocence. "It must be my bad hand," she lamented with a theatrical sigh. "Pick it up." Sarah's eyes moved from the discarded fork on the floor to the triumphant look on Vanessa's face. This was not about a utensil. It was a calculated test, a demand for submission, a power play in front of an audience of 1. But Sarah's mind was moving at lightning speed. Why go to such lengths to fake an injury? What was the point of this whole elaborate performance? And then, a piece of gossip from the kitchen surfaced in her memory. Rocco had been talking about the prenuptial agreement. A sudden, sickening clarity washed over her. If Vanessa could prove she was disabled before the marriage, a standard prenup could potentially be contested, even voided, on the grounds of medical dependency. She could build a case that she was unable to work and could not support herself. This woman was meticulously setting up a legal snare, a trap for lifetime alimony, long before the wedding was official. She was playing Dante Moretti for a fool. Bending down as if to retrieve the fork, Sarah reached for the piece of silver. But as her hand moved toward it, her eyes caught something else just under the table's edge. Vanessa had crossed her legs, and the hem of her expensive dress had ridden up just a fraction of an inch. There, on her supposedly weak left calf, a place normally hidden by long skirts or boots, was a tattoo. It was small, and the ink was faded, looking like the kind of work done in a prison. The symbol was unmistakable, a black widow spider enclosed within a triangle. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She recognized that mark. She had seen it on people back when she was growing up in Queens. This was not a trendy design from a high-end tattoo parlor. It was the calling card of a dangerous and notorious ring of female con artists, a group known as the Widows, who operated primarily out of New Jersey back in the early 2000s. Their entire scheme was infamous. They would marry incredibly wealthy men, fabricate serious medical issues, and then systematically drain them of every cent they possessed. Vanessa Sterling was not from old money. She was no debutante. Her real name was probably something like Veronica Stiles, and she was a professional grifter. In that single moment, Sarah knew she had just discovered the critical piece of leverage she so desperately needed. Sarah quickly stood up and retreated toward the kitchen, her hands trembling not from fear, but with the potent rush of adrenaline that came with this shocking discovery. She burst through the swinging doors, leaving the quiet restaurant for the loud, humid chaos of the dishwashing area. The deafening roar of the industrial sanitizing machines completely drowned out the soft jazz music playing in the dining room. She had to be absolutely certain. Ducking behind a tall stack of clean drying crates, Sarah pulled out her old, cracked iPhone. Her thumbs flew across the screen with purpose. She sent a text message to her cousin Mike, a man who had done 5 years at Trenton State Prison and knew the meaning of every gang symbol on the East Coast. She typed, "Need an ID on a tattoo. It's a spider inside a triangle. All black ink, looks old. Who uses that?" The 3 dots indicating he was typing appeared almost immediately. His reply came a second later. "Stay far away from that, Sarah. That's the Black Widows. They're a Jersey crew. All women, all con artists. They only go after powerful clients." She stayed quiet, unable to answer. A knot of ice formed deep in her gut, twisting painfully. Every terrible suspicion she had was confirmed. Vanessa Sterling was so much more than a wealthy brat with a bad attitude. The woman was a hunter, playing a long and patient game. The supposed nerve damage, the elegant cane she leaned on, the elaborate performance of being helpless. It was all a calculated trap. If she succeeded in marrying Dante Moretti, she would wait just 6 months. Then, she would file for divorce, citing how his dangerous life aggravated her delicate condition, and bleed him for half of his entire fortune. The alternative was even darker. She could wait for the signature on the marriage certificate to dry and then quietly orchestrate a terrible accident for her new husband. A sharp voice cut through her thoughts. "Sarah," Mr. Ritchie, the manager, hissed from just out of sight. "You are needed at table 4. They are asking for you by name. It is you they want." He continued in a hushed tone. "Vanessa claims she wishes to say she is sorry about what happened with the fork." A wave of pure cold washed through Sarah's veins, chilling her to the bone. Sorry? Vanessa? That word was not in her vocabulary. "I understand," Richie whispered, mopping his damp brow with a folded cloth. "This is completely strange, but you must go. And for the love of everything, put a smile on your face." Sarah tugged at the strings of her apron, trying to compose herself, and stepped back into the main room. The sudden shift was dizzying. She left the clatter and heat of the kitchen for the heavy, suffocating silence of the dining area, a room draped in shadow and velvet. As she drew closer to their table, she could feel a profound change in the air. Dante was staring blankly into his wineglass, looking less like a powerful crime boss and more like a man condemned. Vanessa, in sharp contrast, was absolutely glowing. "There she is," Vanessa sang out in a sweet voice. She reached over with her good right hand and gently patted the empty chair beside her. "Come closer, my dear. I feel just dreadful about dropping my fork like that earlier. It's my nerves, you understand. They just seem to misfire sometimes." Sarah cautiously moved closer, keeping her hands clasped tightly behind her back as a defensive posture. "It is no trouble at all, Miss Sterling." "Oh, please, you must call me Vanessa," she purred. Then her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, so low it was almost lost beneath the clinking of glasses from the surrounding tables. "Lean in a little. I have a little secret I want to share with you." Sarah paused for a fraction of a second, then bent down slightly. Vanessa turned her head toward her. In an instant, the warm smile evaporated from her face, replaced by an expression of pure shark-like aggression. Her eyes drilled into Sarah's. "I saw you looking at my leg," Vanessa whispered, her voice now stripped of its phony, polished accent. It was rough, raw, and straight from the street. "You think you are clever because you grew up in the gutter? I own the gutter. If you open your mouth about anything you think you saw, I will do more than get you fired. I will personally plant enough illegal substances in your locker to make sure you go to prison for 20 years. Do we have an understanding? She then pulled back, and the brilliant fake smile snapped back onto her face like a mask being put in place. Oh, Dante, darling, look at her. She is so sweet. She forgives me. Sarah stood up straight, her heart pounding against her ribs like a frantic caged bird. She risked a glance at Dante. He was watching her, his dark eyes narrowed just slightly. He had not heard the whisper, but he had definitely seen the sudden, rigid shift in Sarah's posture. He saw the terror that flashed in her eyes. Get her a glass of champagne, Sarah, Dante said. His voice was full of command, but there was an unusual note of kindness in it. And please bring the check. It seems we are leaving early tonight. No, Vanessa protested, slamming her hand down on the table. It was her right hand, thankfully. We have not even had dessert. I ordered the soufflé. You know I need the sugar, Dante. My blood sugar drops so terribly low when I am in pain. Dante regarded his fiancée with a complicated expression, a mixture of profound exhaustion and growing suspicion. You have been complaining about being in pain all evening, Vanessa. Perhaps we should take you to the hospital. I do not need a hospital, she snapped back immediately. I need my soufflé. Sarah began to back away from the table. I will go and check on your dessert now. As she turned and walked away, she knew she was standing at a critical crossroads. She could simply keep her head down, serve the ridiculous soufflé, and allow Dante Moretti to walk straight into a devastating trap that could cost him everything, including his life. Or she could choose to fight back. Her thoughts drifted to her father. He had been a decent, hard-working man, a union carpenter who was completely ruined by a loan shark. That man had used confusing fine print and a string of empty promises to steal their family home. She despised bullies. She detested liars. And at that moment, she truly, deeply hated Vanessa Sterling. To do anything, she needed absolute, undeniable proof. She walked toward the kitchen, but instead of checking on the dessert order, she made her way to the small security office. The door was thankfully unlocked. Inside, the night guard, an older man named Gus, was nearly asleep, in his chair in front of the wall of monitors. Gus, Sarah whispered, gently shaking his shoulder to wake him. Huh? What is it? Gus jolted awake, quickly adjusting his uniform cap. I need you to pull up the video feed from camera 3. It's the one positioned right above the VIP section. Rewind it to about 20 minutes ago. Sarah, I can't do that, he protested. Richie will have my head. Please, Gus. This is a matter of life or death. I am not exaggerating. Gus looked at the sheer desperation etched on her face and let out a long, weary sigh. He typed a password into the keyboard, and the screens flickered to life. Sarah took control of the mouse and rewound the footage. And there it was. The salt shaker toppling, Vanessa's hand shooting out with impossible speed, the clean catch, the moment of stunned stillness, the realization of her mistake. Holy cow, Gus breathed, leaning closer. Did you see that? Reflex? That woman moves like a professional ninja. Can you save that clip for me? Sarah asked, her voice urgent. I can copy it onto a flash drive, he offered. But Sarah, if you actually use this, you will be declaring open war on the future Mrs. Moretti. You are aware of who her fiancé is, correct? I know, Sarah replied, her eyes glued to the screen. But just look at him. She pointed to the live feed from the dining room. Dante was now sitting alone at the table, rubbing his temples with a pained expression while Vanessa stood nearby, berating a young busboy. He does not look like a happy man, Gus. He looks like a target. Just as Gus was about to copy the video file, the door to the security office was flung open. It was not Mr. Ritchie. It was one of Dante's bodyguards, a mountain of a man named Enzo, whose neck was as thick as a mature tree trunk. He completely filled the doorway, blocking any chance of an exit. Mr. Moretti requires the check, Enzo rumbled in a deep voice. And the lady is asking where her waitress disappeared to. She mentioned you have been gone for far too long. She suggests you might be stealing something. Sarah's stomach plummeted. Vanessa was already moving on to the next phase of her plan, completely discrediting the only witness. I'm coming right now, Sarah said, quickly stepping away from the monitors. She gave Gus a meaningful look, hoping he would save the tape, and then followed the imposing figure of Enzo back into the lion's den. The main dining room was much quieter now than it had been earlier. The majority of the pre-theater diners had departed, leaving behind only the dedicated late-night drinkers and the city's power brokers negotiating deals in hushed tones. When Sarah finally arrived back at table 4, she found Vanessa in the middle of a dramatic performance, complete with crocodile tears. Huge, glistening teardrops were rolling down her perfectly made-up cheeks. "It is gone, Dante. It is completely gone," she wailed, clutching dramatically at her bare wrist. "What is gone?" Dante asked, his patience clearly wearing dangerously thin. "My bracelet," she sobbed. "The vintage Cartier bracelet you gave me for our 3-month anniversary. I had to take it off because it was chafing my wrist. You know how sensitive my skin is, and I placed it right here on the table just next to the breadbasket. And now it has vanished." Dante scanned the surface of the table. It was nearly empty, holding only their wine glasses and the last remnants of their dinner plates. "Are you absolutely certain you did not put it in your handbag?" Dante asked, his tone flat. "I already checked my bag thoroughly. It is not there." Vanessa then raised a trembling, accusatory finger and pointed it directly at Sarah. "She took it. She is the only other person who has been near this table. I saw her admiring it earlier in the evening. She has been consumed with jealousy of me all night long." The terrible accusation hung heavy and silent in the air, thick as smoke. Around the room, every single head turned to stare. Sarah refused to back down, her voice steady and clear. "I did not touch your bracelet, Miss Sterling." A shrill cry ripped from Vanessa's throat. "Liar." She pointed a trembling finger. "Dante, you must search her. Make Enzo do it right now. I am certain she has it concealed in her apron." Dante rose from his chair with a deliberate, almost unnerving calm. He carefully fastened the button on his tailored suit jacket. His gaze moved from Sarah's defiant face to Vanessa's theatrical outrage. "Enzo." Dante's voice was barely a whisper, yet it commanded the room. The large bodyguard took a step forward, awaiting his order. Dante finished his thought. "Check the floor first. I want you to search carefully under the table." "You are defending her!" Vanessa shrieked, her hand flying to the pearls at her neck. "I am supposed to be your fiancée. This little servant is robbing us blind, and you are worried about the floor." "I do not make accusations without evidence, Vanessa," Dante replied, his tone turning to ice. "Enzo, do as I said." With a powerful flashlight in hand, Enzo dropped to one knee. He methodically swept the bright beam across the carpet beneath the heavy oak table. He found nothing but dust. "Nothing here, boss." Vanessa pushed herself to her feet, leaning dramatically on a polished cane. "If it is not on the floor, then it is on her person. Check her pockets immediately. If you refuse, I am picking up the phone and calling the police this very second." And there it was. The trap snapped shut in Sarah's mind. She understood everything in an instant. Vanessa must have hidden the bracelet in her own hand, and then, when she leaned close to whisper that threat earlier, she slipped it into Sarah's apron. It was a classic pickpocket's maneuver, the bump and the plant. A search would prove Sarah's guilt. It would mean she would be arrested and sent to jail. Her testimony against Vanessa's fake injury would become worthless, and the cruel woman would win. Sarah could feel the object's weight in her left apron pocket, a small, cold, and foreign lump that had no business being there. She was completely cornered. "Very well," Sarah announced, her voice filled with a confidence she did not feel. "You have my permission to search me, but we will not do it here, not in the manager's office with only him as a witness." "And why not here?" Vanessa shot back, a flicker of fear in her eyes at the thought of being publicly humiliated. "No," Sarah insisted, her eyes locking onto Dante's. because after I prove my innocence, I do not want you to have the chance to claim that I dropped it on the floor to get rid of it." Dante held her gaze, studying her for a long moment. He saw the fire of defiance in her eyes, but he recognized something deeper as well. He saw integrity. "The office," Dante commanded, his decision made. "We go now." The walk to the manager's office felt like a solemn funeral procession. Mr. Ritchie was wheezing, struggling to catch his breath as he trailed behind. Dante moved with a quiet, deadly stillness. Vanessa limped beside him, her face a mask of smug tragedy. Once they were inside the cramped office, Sarah positioned herself in the middle of the room. "Empty your pockets," Dante instructed her. Sarah first reached into her right pocket. She pulled out her order pad, a simple pen, and a wine key. She set each item neatly on the manager's desk. Then, she moved her hand to her left pocket, the very one that held the cold, hard lump. Her fingers closed around the object. There was no mistaking it. It was the diamond bracelet. She could feel the sharp edges of the precious stones. If she brought it out now, her life would be over. But Sarah had learned a secret of her own. Growing up in Queens, her cousin Mike had taught her a thing or two about misdirection before he got sent away. "Please wait," Sarah said, her voice firm. "Before I show you what is in this pocket, I need to ask Miss Sterling a question." "Just take it out," Vanessa hissed, her patience gone. "No," Dante interjected. "Allow her to speak." Sarah kept her hand firmly in her pocket, her fingers wrapped around the bracelet. "Miss Sterling, you claimed you removed the bracelet because the metal was irritating your wrist. Can you tell us which wrist that was?" Vanessa blinked, caught off guard. "My left wrist, of course. The one that was injured. The metal was pressing against a damaged nerve. And you removed it using your right hand, correct?" "Well, obviously," Vanessa snapped. "My left hand is completely paralyzed." "So," Sarah continued, drawing out her words for effect, "you are telling us that you unclasped a complex Cartier latch, a mechanism that requires 2 fingers to pinch and a third to pull, using only the fingers of one hand. That sounds physically impossible, unless you had assistance, or perhaps unless your left hand is perfectly functional." I managed it with my teeth," Vanessa stammered, her lie sounding weak even to her own ears. "Then show us," Sarah challenged. "Here is Mr. Ritchie's wristwatch. Please put it on your left wrist, and then take it off using only your right hand and your teeth. If you can manage that simple task, I will gladly empty my pocket. But if you cannot, then it suggests you might be lying about more than just a missing piece of jewelry." An absolute silence fell over the small room. It was a tremendous gamble. Sarah was betting everything on the idea that Vanessa's pride would not allow her to admit she could not do it, but that the laws of physics would ultimately betray her. "This is completely absurd," Vanessa shouted, her face turning red. "Dante, you have to stop this." "Do it, Vanessa," Dante said. His voice had lost all trace of boredom. It was now as cold as a winter storm. "If you are telling the truth, it ought to be simple. Show me." Vanessa stared down at the inexpensive watch that Mr. Ritchie was now holding out. Her face was flushed with a mixture of rage and humiliation. She shot a desperate look at Dante, then a hateful one at Sarah. The walls of her deception were crumbling around her. "Fine," she finally screamed. She snatched the watch with her right hand. She clumsily slapped it against her left wrist, but she could not secure the clasp using only one hand. She fumbled with it, her fingers clumsy and useless. The watch slipped and clattered to the floor. It is a different kind of clasp," Vanessa cried out in frustration. "The Cartier one is much easier to open." "It is actually significantly harder," Dante corrected her. "It features a double safety lock. I know this because I purchased it for you." Dante then turned his cold eyes back to Sarah. "Empty your pocket." Sarah inhaled deeply. She pulled her hand from her apron. Vanessa's lips curled into a smirk, anticipating the triumphant glitter of diamonds. Sarah slowly opened her palm. It was completely empty. Vanessa's jaw fell open in disbelief. What? But it must be in there. You put it where exactly? Dante asked, his voice sinking to a dangerous whisper. What were you about to say, Vanessa? That you put it there? Vanessa's face turned the color of chalk. No, that is not what I meant. I meant that I saw her place it in there. Search me, Sarah offered, raising her arms to the side. Enzo, please, go ahead. Enzo performed a quick professional pat-down. She is clean, boss. Sarah had just executed the oldest trick in a server's playbook. As she had walked into the manager's office, she passed by the large laundry bin near the entrance. In a single fluid movement, concealed by the turning of her body, she had expertly flicked the diamond bracelet from her pocket directly into the large pile of soiled linen napkins. It had been an enormous risk, but she knew she had to separate herself from the incriminating evidence. She does not have it, Dante stated flatly. He turned his full attention to Vanessa. So, I will ask again, where is it? She must have swallowed it, Vanessa said, grasping at the most ridiculous excuse she could imagine. Enough, Dante commanded. Enzo, please escort Vanessa to the car. You are throwing me out? Vanessa shrieked in disbelief. I am your fiancé. Not yet. You are not, Dante replied. Now go to the car. I have some business here that needs to be concluded. Vanessa shot Sarah a look of pure, murderous hatred. She turned to leave and limped away, but in her fury she completely forgot to use her cane for support. She took 4 perfectly normal steps toward the door before she realized her mistake, at which point she stumbled dramatically and grabbed the doorframe for balance. Dante observed it all in silence. He did not utter a single word until the office door clicked shut. He then turned back to Sarah. You are very clever. Far too clever to be waiting tables. I need the money from the tips, Sarah said, her voice finally starting to tremble now that the immediate danger was over. You never took the bracelet, Dante said. It was not a question, but a statement of fact. But I believe you know where it is. It is in the laundry bin, Sarah confessed quietly. She planted it on me right after she whispered in my ear. Dante walked directly to the bin and began to dig through the dirty napkins. Within seconds, he pulled out the glittering, brilliant diamond bracelet. He held it up, watching it sparkle under the office light. Why? Dante asked her. Why go through all of this? You could have simply allowed her to win. Why did you choose to fight her? Because, Sarah said, her thoughts turning to her own father. I cannot stand people who take advantage of those who are blind. Dante gave her a puzzled look. I am not blind. Are you certain? Sarah asked, her boldness surprising even herself. She is a professional con artist, Mr. Moretti. That injury to her hand is a complete fake. She is manipulating you to get a huge alimony settlement. She is not even Vanessa Sterling. I saw her tattoo, the spider on her leg. That is a gang marking for a crew of thieves who call themselves the Black Widows. Dante became perfectly still. The very air in the room seemed to grow cold and heavy, dropping 10 degrees in an instant. The Black Widows? Yes, she confirmed. My cousin recognized the style of the ink. She is not the person she pretends to be. And I promise you, if you go through with this marriage, she will take you for every penny you have. Dante just stared at the expensive bracelet resting in his palm. He looked like a man who was waking from a very long and terrible nightmare. I am going to need proof, Dante finally said. Real proof, not just a misplaced bracelet or a clumsy stumble in the hallway. I have video footage, Sarah told him, from the security cameras. It shows her catching a falling salt shaker with her supposedly paralyzed hand. Gus in security has a copy of it. Dante gave a slow, deliberate nod. Get it for me. But before Sarah could even take a step, the phone on the manager's desk began to ring. Mr. Ritchie answered it, listened for a moment, and his face went pale. It is the front desk, Ritchie stammered, his voice shaking. The police are here. They said they received an anonymous tip about a waitress who is selling illegal substances in the restaurant. They have a warrant to search all of the employee lockers. Sarah froze in terror. Vanessa. The bracelet was not her only plan. She had a backup, something far more sinister. My locker, Sarah whispered in horror. If the police find anything illegal in your locker, Dante said grimly, my influence will not be able to help you. Not when the police are already involved. The commissioner has been watching me very closely. I did not do it, Sarah cried, tears welling in her eyes. I know, Dante said. He glanced toward the window. You have to leave this place now, before they come back here to find you. You want me to run? Sarah asked. If I run, it will make me look guilty. If you stay, you will go to jail, Dante countered. She is already 2 steps ahead of you. Go and find out who she really is. I need you to find me her real name. If you can bring me proof that she is a Black Widow, I can handle everything else from there. Dante reached inside his jacket and pulled out a sleek black business card with a private number embossed in shining gold letters. He pressed it firmly into her hand. Run, Sarah, he urged her, and do not stop running until you have found the truth. Sarah clutched the card tightly in her hand. She could hear the heavy, rhythmic tread of police boots echoing down the hallway. She did not waste another second. She kicked off her uncomfortable work heels and sprinted out the back service door, disappearing into the rainy, dark alleyway. In that moment, she left her job, her tips, and her entire former life behind her. The hunt had officially begun. The neon sign of the Starlight Motel in Queens sputtered with a dying flicker, casting a sickly yellow glow into room 104. Sarah was sitting on the edge of a sagging mattress, watching her wet uniform steam as it dried on the radiator. It had been 24 hours, and she had not slept at all. She stared at the black business card that Dante had given her. It felt like her only connection to hope, but she knew she could not call him yet. She needed to have some ammunition first. A sudden heavy knock on the door made her leap to her feet. She grabbed the nearest object, a heavy table lamp, and held it like a weapon. It is just me, a rough voice called from the other side. It is Mike. Sarah quickly unlatched the door. Her cousin Mike slipped into the room, shaking rainwater from his worn leather jacket. He looked tired and worn down, with old scars on his knuckles and tattoos crawling up the side of his neck. But his eyes were still kind. He was holding a thick manila envelope. You have really gotten yourself into some deep trouble this time, cousin, Mike said, as he tossed the envelope onto the worn bedspread. The authorities are turning Loro's restaurant upside down. They discovered a full ounce of uncut cocaine secured to the interior of your locker with tape. You are all over the news reports. They are calling you the Waitress Kingpin. She framed you, Sarah insisted, her voice sharp with anger. I have to find out who she really is, Mike. Please tell me you have something for me. Mike lowered himself into a chair, and his face was a mask of grim reality. I called in some favors with old contacts back in Jersey, he began. That tattoo you told me about? The spider inside the triangle? It is the known mark of the widow's circle, he paused. This isn't a simple street gang, Sarah. Think of it more like a sorority, but for women who are genuine sociopaths. He slid a manila envelope onto the table. Then, he carefully arranged 3 printed photographs on the surface. They were dated and grainy, printed in stark black and white. This is Veronica Stiles, Mike said, tapping the first picture. The woman in the photo was younger, her hair was dark, and she wore no makeup, but her eyes were absolutely the same. They were cold, empty, like a shark's. She was arrested in 2018 on fraud charges. The case was dropped after the main witness vanished. He pointed to the next file. Then, in 2020, she gets married to a tech executive in Seattle. He suffers a fatal heart attack just 3 months into the marriage. She inherited his entire fortune. 2 years later, in 2022, she weds an oil baron from Texas. He has an accident and falls from his yacht. She collects another massive insurance payout. Sarah reached for the photographs, studying them. She alters her appearance, she changes her name, she invents a whole new life story every time. But the pattern is always the same. She marries incredibly wealthy men, and those men always end up dead. Mike slid a medical report across the table. And this is the detail that ties it all together. In every single instance, the husband began showing signs of illness for weeks before he died. They complained of exhaustion, severe headaches, and constant confusion. The physicians diagnosed it as stress or some kind of viral bug. Mike leaned in closer. But my contact is certain she uses digitalis, an extract from the foxglove plant. It systematically causes heart failure, and it is almost impossible to detect in an autopsy unless you are specifically looking for it. A wave of cold dread washed over Sarah. She instantly pictured Dante back at the restaurant, rubbing his temples in pain. She remembered the deep, dark circles beneath his eyes, and the passive way he allowed Vanessa to bully and control him. It was as if he no longer possessed the strength to defend himself. "He is not just exhausted," Sarah whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "She is already actively poisoning him." Mike nodded grimly. "If she is performing this whole act about being a sick fiancé with fake nerve damage," he explained, "it provides her with the ultimate alibi. After he passes away, she can play the part of the grieving, helpless widow who desperately needs his vast estate to survive her supposed disability. Nobody would ever suspect the poor, tragic widow." "When is the wedding?" Sarah asked, her voice tight. Mike's expression soured. "That is the worst part of this. I looked through the online gossip columns. After the so-called stress of the incident at the restaurant, the robbery by the waitress, Vanessa staged a complete emotional collapse. She successfully persuaded Dante to move the entire wedding ceremony forward. They are planning a private signing of the legal documents tomorrow evening at his estate out in the Hamptons. She is calling it a healing ceremony to put the trauma behind them. "Tomorrow," Sarah repeated, the word tasting like ash. She shot to her feet, her body wired with nervous energy as she began to pace the confined space of the room. "The moment he signs those papers, he is a dead man. As soon as she legally becomes his wife, she will administer the final dose." "Sarah, you cannot possibly go there," Mike warned, his tone serious. "Dante's estate is protected by an army of private security. The police are actively searching for you. If you even set one foot on that property, you will either be shot on sight or immediately arrested." "He gave me a second chance," Sarah said, her gaze fixed on the business card in her hand. "He trusted me. He let me escape. He sensed that something was deeply wrong, Mike. He just could not figure out what it was. I have to get this file to him and show him the truth." Mike's voice was gentle but firm. "You are a waitress from Queens, Sarah. How do you plan to infiltrate a mafia compound?" Sarah suddenly stopped her pacing. She looked at her own image in a cracked mirror on the wall. The woman staring back at her did not resemble a waitress any longer. The fear that had consumed her was gone, replaced by a cold, razor-sharp fury. "I am not going to break in," Sarah declared. "It is a wedding, Mike, and every wedding needs a catering staff." The Moretti estate in the Hamptons was not so much a house as it was a modern fortress masquerading as a luxurious palace. It was surrounded by towering stone walls, formidable iron gates, and security guards who patrolled the grounds with communication earpieces. Just inside the service entrance, the organized chaos of a massive event preparation was at its peak. A high-end catering company named Elite Events was busy unloading truckloads of fresh flowers, massive ice sculptures, and numerous cases of expensive champagne. Sarah walked with purpose directly toward the supervisor, a woman clutching a clipboard. She had used cheap dye from a motel bathroom to turn her hair a stark jet black, pulling it back into a tight, severe bun. She wore a pair of thick-rimmed glasses and a stolen catering uniform she had lifted from a laundry service van parked a few blocks away. "I am the agency replacement for your dishwasher," Sarah stated, her voice deliberately flat and disinterested. "They informed me you were short-staffed for tonight's event." The supervisor, a completely stressed-out woman wearing a communication headset, barely glanced up from her list. "It is about time you got here. Go find an apron. Your station is glass polishing. Do not break a single piece, or I will take it out of your soul." Sarah had successfully gotten inside. The kitchen was a bewildering maze of stainless steel counters and loudly shouting chefs. Sarah kept her head bowed low, meticulously polishing champagne flutes one by one, while her eyes methodically scanned every corner of the room. She had to find a way to get to the main hall. She had to find Dante before it was too late. "You, the new girl," a chef bellowed. "Take this platter of appetizers to the library immediately. The groom is in there meeting with his legal team. Now move." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. This was her chance. She carefully lifted the heavy silver tray, which was laden with smoked salmon blinis, and pushed her way through a set of large double doors. The main part of the house was eerily silent, a stark contrast to the noisy kitchen. The floors were polished marble, and the walls were adorned with priceless oil paintings. Sarah moved quickly through the corridors until she located the library. The massive mahogany doors were open just a crack. She could clearly hear voices coming from inside. "I simply do not understand the urgency of this, Vanessa," a deep voice rumbled. It belonged to Dante's lawyer, Mr. Giallo. "The prenuptial agreement has not been properly reviewed by your own legal counsel. If you proceed with signing the marriage license this evening, you will be waiving very specific legal protections." "I do not give a damn about the money," Vanessa's voice whined in response. She was definitely in the room with them. "I only want to be his wife. My overall health is getting worse, Leo. The immense stress from that waitress who attacked me. I feel like my heart could fail at any moment. I need to feel secure. I need the reassurance that Dante is mine." Sarah carefully peered through the narrow opening. Dante was slumped in a large leather armchair positioned near the fireplace. He looked absolutely awful. His skin had a sickly gray pallor, and his eyes were sunken and dark. He was holding a glass of scotch in one hand, but it was shaking uncontrollably. It was a genuine tremor, not a fake one like the performance Vanessa always put on. Vanessa stood directly behind his chair, gently massaging his shoulders with her supposedly good hand. Her left hand hung uselessly at her side, neatly wrapped in a silk bandage. "Just sign the documents, Dante," Vanessa cooed softly into his ear. "Then we can finally get some rest. You seem so incredibly tired, my love. I prepared a special tea for you. It will help you get to sleep." On a small table next to Dante sat a steaming cup of herbal tea. Sarah knew with chilling certainty what was in that cup. One last dose, perhaps. This might be the final, fatal dose. Dante reached for the pen on the table. He looked utterly defeated. "Fine," he sighed. "If it will finally end this argument, give me the papers." Sarah knew she was out of time. There was no opportunity to be subtle. She kicked the door, sending it flying open with a loud bang. "Do not drink that tea!" she yelled, letting the tray of blinis fall from her hands. The heavy silver platter hit the marble floor with a deafening metallic crash. Dante's head snapped up in shock. The lawyer dropped his pen. Vanessa spun around, her expression instantly shifting from surprise to pure, unadulterated fury. "You!" Vanessa shrieked at the top of her lungs. "Security! Get security in here now!" "She is poisoning you!" Sarah shouted, tearing the glasses from her face to reveal her identity. "Dante, you have to look at me. It is Sarah. The tea has been poisoned with digitalis. It is the reason you are so sick." Two huge security guards burst into the room from the hallway, seizing Sarah by both arms before she could get any closer to the table. "Get this insane woman out of my house!" Vanessa screamed, her voice cracking with manufactured panic. "She is the stalker, the drug dealer who framed me. She came here to murder me." "Wait," Dante managed to croak out. He made an effort to rise from his chair, but his legs were unsteady and buckled beneath him. Let her speak." "Dante, my love, she is extremely dangerous," Vanessa pleaded, rushing to his side to physically block his view of Sarah. "She is obsessed with you. She has broken into our private home. You have to allow Enzo to handle her." Enzo, the head of security, stepped into the room. He looked first at Sarah, then over to Dante. Boss? Enzo asked, seeking direction. Check the tea, Sarah gasped, desperately struggling against the tight grip of the guards. Test the tea for poison, and check her leg for the tattoo. You have to ask her about her husband who died in Seattle. Ask her about the oil baron from Texas. For a brief fraction of a second, Vanessa's face turned deathly pale, but she recovered with lightning speed. She is completely delusional. Just look at her. She is high on her own drugs. Vanessa then defiantly grabbed the cup of tea from the table. You think this is poison? Fine. I will drink it myself. I will drink it right now to show you all that this piece of trash is lying. She raised the ceramic cup to her lips. Sarah stopped fighting back. She watched Vanessa's every move with intense focus. Vanessa tilted the cup. She took what appeared to be a sip. Then she slammed the cup back down on the table with a loud crack. See? Vanessa sneered, her voice dripping with contempt. It is just chamomile tea. Now get her out of my sight and call the police. Dante looked over at Sarah. The flicker of hope that had appeared in his eyes was now completely gone. He collapsed back into his chair, defeated. Sarah, why are you doing this? I am very sorry, Mr. Moretti, Enzo said, placing a firm hand on Sarah's shoulder. I must secure the premises now. Sarah was forcefully dragged backward out of the room. As they pulled her away, she watched Vanessa's lips curl into a tiny, triumphant smirk. But Sarah had noticed something crucial. When Vanessa pretended to sip the tea, her throat had not moved. She never actually swallowed. She had faked the entire action, just like she faked the injury to her hand, just like she faked her love for Dante. Sarah was thrown from the library and hauled down the long hallway. Wait! Sarah yelled out to Enzo, her voice desperate. Check her pocket. I am telling you, she did not swallow the tea. She either spit it back into the cup or she is still holding it in her mouth. Enzo, please, listen to me. You know me. I returned the diamond bracelet. I am not a thief. Enzo paused for a moment. He had been there during the incident with the bracelet. He knew that Sarah possessed integrity, and he was also aware that Dante's health had been steadily declining ever since Vanessa had moved into the estate. Hold her right here, Enzo commanded the other guards. What are you planning to do? One of the guards asked. I'm going to check the tea, Enzo grunted, his face set with determination. But before he could take a single step back toward the library, a horrified scream echoed from within the room. Dante! Oh my God, Dante! Enzo and the other guards immediately ran back, pulling Sarah along with them. Inside the library, Dante was sprawled on the floor next to his chair, his body convulsing violently. A white foam was beginning to form at the corners of his mouth. He is having a heart attack, Vanessa wailed, standing over his body and wringing her hands together in a display of panic. She was using both of her hands. I told all of you the stress would kill him. He is dead. Someone call 911. Sarah violently broke free from the grip of the distracted guard and immediately rushed to Dante's side. She pressed her fingers to his neck to check his pulse. It was faint and thready, but it was there. He is not dead, Sarah said with authority. But he will be soon if we do not act right now. We need to remove the poison, she pleaded. But no one listened. Get away from him. Vanessa moved toward Sarah with a speed that defied her frail act, forgetting the cane, forgetting her supposed limp. She slammed her hands into Sarah's chest, a shove filled with a shocking, desperate force. Sarah stumbled backward, her balance gone. Her hand shot out and landed on the metal dinner cart, the one they had used for the contract signing just moments before. Her fingers instinctively wrapped around the cold, heavy steel of a utensil. It was a silver dinner fork. She stared at Vanessa, who now stood guard over Dante's body, a physical barrier between him and the guards, between him and any hope of survival. She was letting him die. In that moment, Vanessa looked absolute, a queen in her castle, a black widow defending her web. But even the deadliest spider has a fatal flaw. Sarah scrambled back to her feet, the fork clutched tightly in her hand. Stabbing Vanessa was not an option. That would only get her killed by the guards. Her goal had to be exposure, not violence. She had to shatter the illusion Vanessa had so carefully built. "Hey, Veronica!" Sarah shouted the name she remembered from the mugshot, her voice echoing in the tense library. Vanessa froze instantly, her head whipped around, her eyes wide with shock and fury. "Catch!" Sarah did not aim the fork at Vanessa's chest or arm. She threw it with all her strength directly at Vanessa's face. It was a fast, vicious throw, the silver utensil spinning like a deadly star through the air. This was a test of reflexes. If Vanessa was genuinely a frail invalid, she would barely have time to flinch before it hit her. But if she was a lethal predator with the reflexes of a killer, Vanessa's supposedly paralyzed left hand shot up like a viper. It was pure instinct, a survival reflex that she could not suppress. She snatched the spinning fork from the air just inches from her left eye. Her grip was flawless, a perfect combat hold. Her arm was rock steady. The entire room fell into a deathly silence. Everyone stared at Vanessa, the fragile, crippled fiancée, who now stood over the dying Dawn, holding a dinner fork in her supposedly dead hand. Enzo saw it. The family lawyer saw it. Every single guard saw it. The realization of her mistake washed over Vanessa's face. She looked down at the fork as if it were a snake. Then she looked up at the room full of stunned men holding guns. "Uh-oh," Sarah whispered into the crushing, absolute quiet of the library. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, but lasted only 3 seconds. Vanessa remained frozen in place, the silver fork gripped in her once paralyzed left hand, her arm still raised in a perfect defensive block. "Adrenaline!" Vanessa shrieked, her voice high and cracking with false panic. She dropped the fork as though it had burned her skin. "It was a miracle! The shock! It must have woken up my nerves!" "Save it!" Enzo growled, his voice a low rumble of thunder. He drew his pistol, but he did not aim it at Sarah. He leveled it directly at Vanessa's heart. "Step away from the boss." "Enzo, have you lost your mind?" Vanessa cried, backing away slowly with her hands raised in surrender. "I am his fiancée. That waitress is the one you should be worried about." "I saw the catch, Vanessa," Enzo said, his voice cold as ice. He carefully stepped between her and Dante's struggling form on the floor. "And I also saw you pretend to take that sip of tea. You never actually swallowed a drop." Enzo reached down and picked up the delicate teacup Vanessa had placed on the table. He brought it to his nose and inhaled sharply. "Bitter almonds," he announced to the room. "And you are still standing perfectly fine." "He is having a heart attack!" Vanessa screamed, desperately pointing at Dante, who was now gasping for every breath on the expensive rug. "He needs a doctor, not an interrogation from you. Call the medics," Enzo barked to one of his men, his eyes never leaving Vanessa. "And put cuffs on her right now. Do not you dare touch me," Vanessa snarled, her voice dropping to a low growl. The mask of the helpless victim finally fell away completely, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unrestrained rage. She reached into a hidden garter belt, not for a handkerchief, but for a small, sharp ceramic knife she had successfully smuggled past the estate's metal detectors. She lunged, but not at Enzo. He was too large, too prepared. She went for Dante. Her plan was clear. If she could not marry him for his fortune, she would finish the job and claim he died before the police and medics could arrive. "No!" Sarah screamed and threw herself forward. She was unarmed, a waitress against a killer. But she had a serving tray. She swung the heavy silver platter with every ounce of strength she had. The sound was a loud metallic clang that echoed through the room as the tray connected with the side of Vanessa's head. The ceramic knife flew from her hand and skittered across the polished floor. Vanessa crumpled to the carpet, unconscious, her designer gown draped around her like a shroud on a broken doll. "Nice swing," Enzo muttered, lowering his weapon and putting it back in its holster. He immediately knelt beside his boss. "Boss, stay with us. The medics are just 2 minutes out." Sarah dropped to her knees on Dante's other side. His face was a sickly pale color, and his skin was cold and clammy to the touch. "He needs oxygen," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Loosen his tie. We have to keep him awake." Dante's eyes fluttered open, struggling to focus. He looked at the ornate ceiling, then his gaze drifted to Sarah. He saw Vanessa, unconscious on the floor, and then his eyes found Sarah's again. "You," Dante wheezed, his voice a faint, rasping whisper. "You came back for me." "I did not finish my shift," Sarah replied, forcing a small smile even as tears began to well in her eyes. Someone had to clear the table. 2 weeks later, the bold headline of the New York Post screamed from a newsstand. "Black Widow caught in web. Mafia fiancé exposed as serial killer." Sarah sat on a wooden bench in Central Park, reading the details in the article. The police had discovered a vial of digitalis poison inside Vanessa's expensive vanity case. They had uncovered a trail of fake medical records. Most damning of all, they found the passports of 3 previous husbands, all of whom had died suddenly from supposed heart conditions. Veronica Stiles, whose alias was Vanessa Sterling, was going to prison for the rest of her life, with no chance of parole. Sarah carefully folded the newspaper. She was finally free. The police had dropped all the charges against her the moment Enzo provided the security camera footage from the restaurant, but her freedom felt hollow. She was now unemployed, completely broke, and officially homeless, having checked out of her cheap motel room that very morning. She watched the autumn leaves drift down from the trees, wondering if her old boss Laura would ever consider giving her job back. It seemed unlikely. "I have always preferred the view from my personal terrace," a familiar voice said. Sarah looked up, startled. A sleek black town car was parked silently at the curb. Dante Moretti stood beside it, leaning on a cane, a real one this time. As he recovered from the potent toxin, he looked noticeably thinner, but the healthy color had returned to his face. He was dressed in a simple sweater and jeans, looking less like a feared mafia don, and more like an ordinary man who had been granted a precious second chance at life. "Mr. Moretti," Sarah said, quickly getting to her feet, "I am so glad to see that you are okay." "Dante," he corrected her gently. He walked over to the bench and sat down. "Please, sit with me." Sarah sat. "I owe you a sincere apology," Dante began, his voice serious. "And I owe you a thank you. You saved my life, Sarah. You saved it twice. Once with a simple warning bracelet, and a second time with a dinner fork." "I just did what anyone would have done," Sarah shrugged, feeling uncomfortable with the praise. "That is a rare quality in my world," Dante replied. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. "I know that you lost your job because of me. I know you lost your apartment. This is a check. It is more than enough to buy a new house, or a restaurant, or whatever else you could possibly want. It is yours." Sarah looked at the thick white envelope. It represented a life she could never have imagined. "I cannot take this," she said quietly. "It is not charity," Dante insisted, his tone firm but kind. "Think of it as a severance package for the single best waitress I have ever had in my life." Sarah hesitated for a long moment. "I do not want your money, Dante. I want to feel safe. I want a job where I do not have to constantly look over my shoulder in fear." A small smile touched Dante's lips. "It just so happens that I fired my head of security at the main office. He somehow missed a woman with a ceramic knife. I need to hire someone who is observant, someone who notices the small details that everyone else misses, someone who is not afraid to throw a serving tray at a killer when necessary." Sarah could not help but laugh. "You want to hire me for security? I do not know the first thing about that kind of work. You knew more than Enzo did that day," Dante said simply. "The job pays 6 figures a year. It comes with full benefits, and I can promise you this: the napkins are very soft." Sarah looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the man behind the fearsome reputation. He was not a monster. He was just a man who had become lonely enough to let a real monster into his life. She took the envelope from his hand and then gently handed it back to him. "Keep the money," Sarah said with a newfound confidence. "I will take the job." Dante extended his hand toward her. "Welcome to the family, Sarah." As their hands shook, the sun finally broke through the gray clouds, casting a bright light on the silver head of the cane in Dante's hand. This was not some kind of fairy tale ending. This was real life. But sometimes, even in the complicated real world, the good guys actually win. And that is the story of how a simple dinner service brought down one of the most dangerous and successful con artists in modern history. Vanessa Sterling truly believed she could act her way into a massive fortune. But she forgot one of the most important rules. You can lie to the boss, but you can never, ever lie to the staff. Sarah did not just save one man's life that day. She proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon in any room is not a gun or a knife. It is a simple silver fork and a pair of eyes that are willing to see the truth. If you enjoyed this story of justice being served cold, please take a moment to hit that like button. It truly helps our channel grow and reach new listeners. Subscribe and be sure to turn on your notifications so you never miss another story from us. And please tell me in the comments below, have you ever caught someone in a lie just by paying close attention to their body language? This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories and valuable life lessons to our audience.